everybody, welcome to Flosstube number 60. Today we're going to look at a sampler and talk about the differences between English and American samplers. And I certainly am no expert. There are many more out there that know a whole lot more than I do about it, but I'm just going to share with you a few things that I've learned, and we're going to play a little game. We're going to look at the sampler I'm going to show you here in just a minute, and then we're going to talk about English versus American samplers, and then let you try and guess which one do you think this particular sampler is. And hopefully, if I've done my job well, you'll kind of have an idea and be able to make an educated guess about which you think it is. Just a little market update. I am waiting on the very last of my pieces this week. Should be back from the framer first part of the week. Emails will be going out to the shops on Thursday the 13th. And then next weekend, I'll do a market preview Flosstube for you and show you the different pieces that I'm taking to market this year. I'm really excited about them. I'm happy to show them to you. I have a couple smaller pieces, and then I have some samplers that, you know, that's just our favorite for those of us that are sampler stitchers. So hopefully there's a little bit of something for everyone this year. Let's go ahead and get started though. I want to talk about the sampler. So first of all, I'm going to show it to you. This is not one that I have reproduced. I'm not sure that I'm even going to reproduce it. I might, but it's been in my collection for quite a while. It's by Susan Beggarly, and she stitched this when she was 11 years old in 1865. So very nice work. And I know, sorry, there's some glare on here. This doesn't have the non-reflective glass on it yet. If I do take it out to reproduce, I'll reframe it and have that added. But if you can see, and I know it's hard on these videos, she did an excellent job with her stitching. It's got lots of faded colors in there. It's still beautiful with the colors that she used, but I'm sure at one time it was a very vibrant sampler. So now let's talk about just a little bit. What are some differences between an English versus an American sampler? The first thing you can do is look at the background, the linen. And typically, and when I say typically, I say that because it's not a hard and fast rule. It may be that usually you see English samplers with a very fine wool background, but that's not always the case. That's not 100%. American samplers you would have seen with linen or like a homespun type fabric. And one clue to know if it's made out of wool is sometimes if it's not been carefully taken care of, there could be teeny tiny holes in the linen where moths have gotten into it because they do like the wool. Another thing that you'll notice with English versus American samplers is that English samplers tend to be very symmetrical. And now some people love that. Some people like it to be more random. So if you like symmetry, you'll probably love English samplers. If you like the more random or folksy kind of look, then American samplers are probably more for you. Another thing that you'll see is with English samplers, they'll have lots of initials. It could be their initials, could be their family's initials. It could be friends that they have. I know with the Bristol samplers, lots of times they would have stitched either family members' names or initials rather, and it could be friends they've made in the orphanage. They would include their initials as well. And I know the Martha Warby's Bristol that I have has some of both. American samplers, you really wouldn't have seen that. They would probably have their name, but that's about it. Not all of the initials that you see. One of my market releases this year is a Scottish sampler, and it has, I think, if the family if she even knew the person, she put their initial. It has row upon row of initials, but it's beautiful. So that's another difference with the American versus the English samplers. You would have seen little spot motifs. You would have seen maybe just very specific type of stitches, where with an American sampler, it would have just been more random, just kind of what they were in the mood to stitch at the moment is the way it looks sometimes. So it wouldn't have been as precise as in the English samplers. Usually, an American sampler is much more collectible. That's not always the case. You may be someone who loves English samplers, so if that's the case, that's what you're going to collect. But typically, and remember what I said about that word typically, the American samplers are going to be a little harder to collect. And that's just because, number one, they're a little more rare. And if we think about it, England was around a whole lot longer than America has been. Really, us that live here in the States, we're a baby country. We really have not, as a country, been around that long. People have been here longer than that, but as the United States, it's really not been that long. And so there's just the opportunity for more samplers that have been made. Sorry, Pup's barking, and so if he barks, just please excuse it. English samplers would have been kept in drawers and passed down through families, where American samplers, it wasn't as noticeable in the homes. They would have done them to practice or for fun or to put up, but nothing like the English samplers. Also, particularly samplers in the South, we just don't see them here. I can go to antique shops all day long, and very rarely will I see a sampler. Whereas if I go to the East Coast, I'm more likely to find at least one sampler in each antique shop that I visit. That's because that's where our country started. And as people moved west or south, a sampler is not something that they would have valued as a possession to pack and bring. They were limited on their space, so they really wouldn't have had the space to bring along a sampler when they could have packed something more useful that they thought of at the time. So that's just one of the reasons why they're a little more valued, is because they're a little more rare. Also, an American sampler tends to be more vibrant, has more of a pictorial scene, and a lot of people just like that. They aren't necessarily crazy about just having a lot of marking samplers. I do find something beautiful, though, in just a very neat alphabet. Maybe that's because I taught school for years. I don't know. But most people enjoy the pictorial scenes and the more vibrant colors, so that might make them a little bit more collectible. Especially the American samplers, it's a little easier to identify what region those samplers came from. Our country's huge, and each area has its own unique quirks. I'll never forget going to New York, and when each of my boys graduated from high school, that was my gift to them. It was a mom-son trip. I figured that's our last big trip together, just the two of us, and so they got to pick where they wanted to go. And my oldest son wanted to go to New York City. And so we went up there not thinking anything about our Southern accent. And my son has even a slower Southern drawl than I do. We hear ourselves and don't think we have an accent, but oh my goodness, you go somewhere else and that's the first thing somebody says. But we were in New York, and everybody that we would talk to kept saying, "Where are you guys from? What country are you from?" We're like, "We're from the South, Arkansas. It's part of the States." And we just kind of got tickled, and it became a running joke the whole time we were in New York City. But anyway, with that said, in the samplers, just like with our accents, you can kind of determine what region of the country a sampler came from based on the motifs or just the way the sampler looked. And it's a little easier than looking at the English samplers. And so that may be another reason that makes them somewhat more collectible. But what Richard Griesick told me one time, and I really found it to be some of the very best advice, is a sampler is worth what it's worth to you, basically. There's no one thing that determines if you should collect a particular sampler or not. Some people, like I said earlier, just love English samplers. Some people love collecting American samplers. And so for me, when I look at a sampler and I'm looking to purchase it, there are some things that I'm looking at in particular. And nobody else may look at these. This is just my list of what I want a sampler to have. It's just, first of all, when I see the sampler, does it catch my eye where I'm like, oh, I've got to look at that a little closer. I've seen some beautiful samplers, but they really haven't caught my eye like that. Then the second thing I look at usually is the verse. I love a verse on a sampler. And there's been many samplers in my collection that I've purchased simply because of the verse. Then I like a border. I love a pretty border. And so lots of times that catches my attention. My last name is Richardson. And so if a sampler has the last name Richardson, that's an immediate draw to me. I have a wall in our master bedroom that is all Richardson samplers. And so I love to add to that collection. I did pass one up recently because it didn't just, oh, I have to have that. It was a beautiful sampler, but I passed on it this time, and that's a rarity. So those are kind of things that I look for when I'm trying to decide whether I need to add a sampler to my collection or not. So just a little tidbit of advice that I'm going to pass along that I got is that a sampler's worth is exactly what it means to you as a collector. Is it something you just really have to have? And if it is, it may mean more to you than it would anyone else. So that's kind of, you have to give your own guidelines for what a sampler means to you. Let's look specifically at Susan Baggerly. I'm not for certain. I feel pretty certain, but I still have some digging to do, that I found out who she was. And so as I'm researching, and I've kind of talked about this on here before, when I go into MyHeritage or Ancestry or Family Search, I'm going to put in the name. I'm lucky on this one because it tells me how old she was when she did the sampler, and I can subtract the years, how old she was from the date the sampler was done, and get an approximate birth date, at least within 1 or 2 years. So with that, and with the knowledge of American versus English samplers, I was able to put in what I felt was a decent search. Now, do you guys have any idea? Do you think this is English or do you think this is American? If we look at it very carefully, it's very symmetrical. Her stitches are very precise. The only thing, I believe this is a very fine linen, but remember I said typically, so this is the case that probably falls in. She has some crowns on here. That could also be a sign. So I believe this is an English sampler. So with that, I put in England as a birthplace. And so what I found was a Susan Baggerly, and she was born in 1854, just outside of London. And it didn't give me a lot of information on her. I'm going to keep digging and hope maybe I can find some more about it. But I think she just was an excellent stitcher. I don't think this was a haphazard sampler. I don't think she just stitched it necessarily for fun, but I believe she enjoyed stitching, and this is why. She included many, many different types of stitches that a novice stitcher would not have attempted. And it amazes me that she did this at age 11. One thing that I did not notice until recently, she has basic cross stitches all the way around, but they're very, very neat. She has some over 1. If you look at this little alphabet up here, look at those teeny tiny stitches. Then this is kind of my, oh my goodness moment. You see her verse in the middle, and she has used a 4-sided stitch for the first letter in each line. And I thought, oh, that was really neat. You know, she really did a good job. And then I looked at the rest of the words in the verse, and I just kept looking. It's kind of hard. It's more of a dull color. But as I got my magnifier out, and I don't know that you'll be able to see it, this is stitched over one, and she has not only done a full cross stitch, she has back stitched around each of those letters. I can't imagine. I mean, an over one, and then back stitched around each of the letters in her verse. It's just amazing. So she was a young girl who I believe had to love stitching, and who was very conscientious about her work, because she really did a beautiful job on her sampler. I did get tickled because it is such a fine light color. You can see where she has carried in a few spots. She's like, no, not gonna cut that. So while the front of her sampler is very neat, she did carry on the back. She probably thought, nobody's ever gonna look at this. Little did she know, here we would be several years later. Then the last thing I kind of want to talk about on Susan's sampler, and it just tickles me. I don't know the reason behind this. I keep looking, and I did look and research to see if there was an article or anything written about it. But sometimes the proportions on samplers really tickle me. It kind of drives me nuts. If I'm designing a sampler, I want the proportions to be, they can't be exact necessarily all the time, but pretty close. I want you to look at this beautiful dog in the middle, and she does such a good job with her shading. I mean, she's used many different browns and taupes and tans in her dog to give him nice shading. Then look at her people next to the dog. That is the funniest proportion. Either that is just a ginormous dog or teeny tiny people. So her proportions were kind of off, but I don't think it bothered her. And it is still a very beautiful picture, but it just tickled me and how big that dog was compared to those two tiny people. One more thing I will touch on, and I know Hands Across the Sea has a great website link with different motifs and their meaning. And that's kind of fun, because to me, when a girl used motifs in her sampler, that was kind of like nearly, pardon me, a hidden message maybe, with what they meant and what they represented. I don't know that they knew that all the time. Maybe someone put a flower in just because they thought it was a pretty flower. But let's talk about these motifs just a minute and what they mean. Had crowns down here, and typically a crown would mean royalty or respect, dignity. We have the two harps, and a harp stood for purity or music. The dog would have been and represented loyalty and protection. Now I have a great big fur baby. He's Great Pyrenees. He's got a little something else mixed in with him, but he's huge. And I always felt so protected when he's around me because he's such a big guy. And he's sweet as he can be, but some people look at him and are like, oh no, I don't want to come in because you've got this huge dog. And I'm like, just pet him, he'll be great. So this dog would have represented protection. Then we have some urns, remembrance, and then flowers could have represented youth. So whether Susan knew what those motifs meant and she wanted that included in her sampler or not, I don't know. But it's kind of fun to guess and wonder, isn't it? The verse I talked about how she stitched it, it says, God of my salvation, hear and help me to believe. Simply do I now draw near thy blessing to receive. And she included proper punctuation in hers, which is a rarity. I don't always see that. So as a school teacher, I was very proud of Susan. Also, she balanced it, kind of evened it out a little bit. So it wasn't just strung out in one long line with a word here and a word there. I have stitched some samplers where the young girl left a word out, and instead of frogging, she just inserted it. I think that would have driven Susan nuts. She might be a little OCD like I am. I don't know. So anyway, I hope you learned a little bit about English versus American samplers. And like I said, I'm certainly not an authority on it. I'm just sharing what I know. And look at some of your samplers if you have a collection and see if you don't already know. See if you can figure out if they would have been an American sampler or an English sampler. It's kind of fun to guess, isn't it? So with that said, I'm going to leave you guys for today, and I'll come next weekend with my market releases. So I'm getting excited. It's been a super busy time, but market's always so much fun. I enjoy getting to go see the other shop owners, see the other designers, and just people coming in and out. So if you're coming to the Nashville market, be sure to pop your head in and say hi. I look forward to seeing some of you. And then I'm going after market to see my grandbaby. So that makes it even more exciting. We're halfway to where my son and his wife and grandson live. And so it's like, I can't be this close and not go another day further and actually pick him up and see him. So I'm counting down the days to market and grandbaby visiting. So anyway, I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. Enjoy next week. Get some stitching in each day if you can. Try and stay warm. I know there's some cold fronts coming through our state and states around us. And I'll talk to you next weekend. Bye.